Welcome to the Dawson Files, a collection of haunting cases where justice and truth rarely walk the same path. Each story stands alone, yet every investigation reveals another piece of Detective Jack Dawson's world. In these pages, you'll find love, betrayal, guilt, and redemption, the thin line between right and wrong, light and shadow. Enter the case file, and remember, every truth has its price. This story was told years later by Inspector Juan Morales himself to his old friend, Detective Jack Dawson, a case that began under the burning sun of Mexico and ended in the quiet shadow of truth. At the end of a dusty road, on the outskirts of a small Mexican town, stood a large white mansion, solitary and silent. People simply called it the migrant's house. Its owner, Don Miguel Rodriguez, had spent more than half his life in the United States. He returned each season, a few months at a time, then left again for what he called the other side. His gestures carried American rigor, his eyes the fatigue of coming back. By his side lived Rosalia, his wife, lively, generous, with a contagious kindness. In the neighborhood, they said she always had a gift for everyone: a scarf, a perfume, a kind word. Her kindness had become a ritual, as if every return of her husband had to be marked by a gesture of sharing. But that spring, Don Miguel seemed more agitated than usual. "We need to redo everything," he declared one morning, looking at the house's walls. "The paint is healing, the doors creak, and I can't stand this smell of dust anymore." Rosalia, amused, shrugged. "You always say that when you're bored, Miguel." A few days later, he called in a local contractor, Fernando Ramirez, to draw up an estimate. They spoke of paint, ceilings, a thorough cleaning. Young men from the neighborhood were hired to empty the furniture, move the wardrobes, shift the rugs. The house, usually so quiet, filled with voices, hammers, laughter, dust, and life. Rosalia moved among the workers with her usual gentleness, offering cool water, watching the smallest details. She seemed happy to see the old home transform. Don Miguel, meanwhile, stood apart, observing every gesture with a calculating, almost suspicious eye. When the work was finished, the house recovered its former whiteness. The workers were paid and thanked. Don Miguel shook each one's hand, generous, almost warm. That very evening, he suddenly announced, "I'm leaving tomorrow." The children called, "There's an emergency with our business over there." Rosalia frowned. "Already? You just arrived." He gave a vague smile. "It will only be for a few days. You know, work." It was their last peaceful conversation. At dawn the next day, a taxi lifted a cloud of dust as it left the courtyard. Rosalia, standing in the doorway, waved her hand. Don Miguel, behind the window, did not turn back. The days following Don Miguel's departure passed with a strange slowness. Rosalia continued to live by her habits: a morning visit to the market, a word exchanged with the baker, a visit to her sick neighbor. She had that simple nature of women who find a discreet calm in routine. But little by little, her presence grew rarer. On the first day, people thought she was resting. On the second, that she had visited a relative. On the third, her absence became the subject of murmurs. The small shop at the corner, where she bought sweetbread each morning, remained oddly quiet. The shopkeeper, worried, would sometimes look toward the White House. "She doesn't come anymore," he said to a customer. "That's not like her." On the evening of the fourth day, a thick, sweetish odor began to spread through the lane. At first, they thought of a dead animal, but when the air became unbreathable, the neighbors looked at one another, the same premonition in their guts. Toward nightfall, a group gathered in front of the gate. They knocked, called, listened. No answer. The shutters were closed, the light off. At last one of the men said, "We must notify the police." The next morning, a provincial police car stopped in front of the house. Commissaire Juan Morales got out, a lean man with a tired face, whose eyes always seemed to search for what others did not see. He knocked at the door. Silence. He tried to open it. Locked. He walked around, observing the windows, the locks, the steps. Then he asked an officer to contact the husband, still in the United States. When Don Miguel gave his authorization by phone, Morales sighed and simply said, "Open it." The door gave way under a light shove of the shoulder. The air that escaped from the hallway was heavy, almost sweet. Inside, the house seemed frozen in expectation. The furniture perfectly arranged, the curtains drawn, everything breathed order, too perfect order. Morales moved forward slowly, observing every detail. No sign of struggle, no chair overturned, nothing. On the staircase, however, he saw something. A tiny footprint printed in the dust, as if someone had walked there with shoes covered in mud. He raised his eyes toward the landing. A door, ajar, let a breath of air pass. "Up there," he murmured. In the bedroom, the sight froze the team. Rosalia lay on the floor, dressed in her light-colored dress, her head slightly turned. Her throat bore a clean, precise cut. Around her, nothing was overturned, no sign of struggle. The medical examiner, called urgently, confirmed what Morales feared, dead for about 3 days. The commissaire closed his eyes for a moment, then, in a low voice, informed the husband. "And no one touches anything." He leaned over the scene, detailing the slightest shadow. A phrase came to him, cold and instinctive. "Whoever killed here knew what he was doing, and he wanted us to think otherwise." The first day of questioning began at dawn. Fernando Ramirez, the mason, entered first. A stocky man, hands blackened with dried paint. He held his cap between his fingers, visibly nervous. "You were in charge of the painting work?" "Yes, commissaire. 3 days of work with my 2 helpers." "When did you leave the site?" "The day before Don Miguel's departure." Morales nodded. "And you never went back?" "Never. I had another job 20 kilometers away." "You can verify." The registers, invoices, and phone records confirmed his statements. Fernando was allowed to leave, but his face remained haunted. "Madame Rosalia, she was a saint," he murmured before crossing the door. The next day, 5 neighborhood boys were summoned. They had helped move the furniture before painting, then put everything back in place. They looked alike, wrinkled shirts, evasive eyes, respected more out of fear than trust. "Who went upstairs?" Morales asked. Silence. Then one of them, shyly, "No one, sir. The boss told us to stay downstairs." The commissaire observed them for a long time. Their versions matched. Their employer, a farmer, confirmed their presence on his property at the time of the crime. GPS data from their phones placed them several kilometers away. They were released. 2 women came in next. They still wore their worn uniforms, out of habit or fear. "When was the last time you came?" "Tuesday, sir, before he left. And after, never again." "He paid us. Everything was clean." The tone was frank. The fingerprint survey confirmed their absence from the place after the indicated date. They left, eyes reddened, whispering prayers for Rosalia's soul. That evening, Morales spread all the documents on the table: building plans, fingerprint reports, list of participants, times, dates, witnesses. Nothing directly linked any of them to the death. But one thought imposed itself. All those comings and goings, that work, all those different hands on the walls, were they really coincidences? Night had fallen on the small town when Commissaire Morales returned alone to the house. The technicians had finished their work. The seals were in place. But something in this perfection irritated him. He entered slowly, soundlessly. The air inside still held the smell of fresh paint, mixed with the subtler scent of disinfectant. The walls shone faintly under the lamp he carried. Everything seemed clean, too clean, as if death itself had been washed away. He climbed the stairs, his eyes following the immaculate steps. On the last one, he stopped. There, a minute trace, a flake of dried mud, barely visible. He contemplated it for a long time, almost with respect. It was the only thing that resisted the lie of the cleaning. In the bedroom, the crime scene had been photographed from every angle. Rosalia's body had been removed, but the silence remained, dense, suspended. Morales placed his hand on the doorframe. Beneath his fingers, the smooth surface of the wood bore no prints. Not even a finger on the handle, he murmured. He took a few steps. On the nightstand, nothing. On the dressing table, nothing. On the window pane, nothing. It was as if the victim had lived in a house without touching anything, or as if someone, after the tragedy, had erased everything down to the memory of each gesture. He took out a small notebook and wrote, "No foreign prints." Thorough cleaning, gloved hands, meticulous preparation. Then he added a sentence he did not yet understand. This murder was anticipated, but by whom? On his way back downstairs, he stopped in the hallway. The living room gleamed. The armchairs were aligned. The floor freshly waxed. An empty house, yet bearing the mark of an organized presence, almost administrative. His deputy Ramos entered with a notebook in hand. "Commissaire, the analyses are complete. No sign of forced entry on the doors or windows." Morales bent over the desk, looked up. "And the jewelry? Some pieces are missing, as well as a few valuable decorative objects. The domestic staff say they were kept in a black travel bag, which we haven't found." The commissaire remained silent for a moment, taking in the motionless room around him. The furniture had been put back in place, the curtains drawn. Nothing seemed out of position. "A partial theft, then?" he asked at last. "That's how it appears, commissaire." The next morning, before dawn, he stopped by the station. He leafed once more through the husband's file, an elderly man with no record, married for 30 years, back in the country for barely 10 days. Their union seemed calm, ordinary, but Morales knew that no crime is born of chance. 2 weeks went by. The case seemed to bog down in its own silence. The local papers had stopped mentioning it. People murmured that it was a passing crime, committed by a drifter or a day laborer, until that March morning when the station phone rang. An officer picked up, then transferred the call. "Commissaire, a man is asking to speak to you. He says he found something in a bag." Morales frowned. "Show him in." The man who entered looked simple, almost timid. He wore an old straw hat and held in his hands a brown leather suitcase, worn and time-cracked. "I bought it yesterday at the flea market in San Felipe, about 20 kilometers from here," he said hesitantly. "And?" asked Morales. "While cleaning it, I found this." He drew a yellowed photograph from an inner pocket. Morales took it and studied it for a long time. A couple posed, smiling in front of a fountain, Rosalia and Don Miguel. A shiver ran up his arm. He looked up. "You're sure it was inside this suitcase?" "Absolutely. Wedged between the lining and the shell. I wouldn't have found it without tearing it a little." "Where did you buy it?" "From a junk dealer, a man who sells everything. I can take you to him." Under a harsh sun, Morales walked the market aisles with the man. The stalls overflowed with disparate objects, clocks, lamps, old trunks, toys from another age. The dealer sat behind a table, a cigar at the corner of his mouth. When he saw the police, he paled slightly. "This suitcase, do you remember whom you sold it to?" Morales asked. "Yes, to this gentleman, yesterday morning. It was part of a lot I bought a few days ago." "Where?" "In a big city, 200 kilometers from here. I have invoices, commissaire. Everything's legal." He pulled out a greasy notebook and showed names, dates, signatures. The papers seemed in order, yet something in his gaze betrayed unease. Morales slowly closed the suitcase. He didn't notice anything strange inside. "No, commissaire, it's old stock. I don't have time to go through everything." The man beside him, the buyer, stared at the ground, nervous. The commissaire noted the detail, then simply said, "Thank you. If we need you, we'll call." Back in his car, Morales set the photo on the seat beside him. The image seemed to be looking at him. The next morning, at 9 sharp, Commissaire Morales stepped once more through the gate of the San Felipe market. The sun was already beating down on the canvas awnings, making dust sparkle in the hot air. The dealer awaited him, evidently prepared for the visit. Polished shoes, items sorted by category, as if to make everything breathe innocence. "Mr. Vargas, Morales began evenly. Let's talk about that suitcase. The dealer nodded, ill at ease. I've told you everything, Commissaire. I bought a complete lot from a supplier. Which one? A man who calls himself Torres. He comes once a month with a truckload of goods. He buys in several towns and resells retail. Morales opened his notebook. Do you have a receipt, a date, a phone number? Yes, look. Vargas handed over a crumpled paper. The invoice bore the date 2 days after the murder. The commissaire slowly raised his head. 2 days after Madame Rosalia Rodriguez's death. Is that correct? Yes, maybe. I don't pay attention to such things. Morales slid the paper into his file, then lowered his voice. You knew this suitcase contained the couple's photo. Vargas blanched. I swear I didn't. I never touched what was inside. Curious, all the same. You're the only one to have handled an object linked to this case without realizing it. Do you understand my perplexity? Commissaire, I'm just a seller. I don't know these people. Morales was silent for a few seconds, his gaze weighing on him, then concluded in a neutral tone. Very well, you'll give me everything you have on this Torres. Address, number, a description of the truck, and, if possible, his face. The police car then cut through the road toward the big city. The sun was sinking, stretching shadows across the asphalt. Morales, silent, held a sketch of a face, the new suspects. In town, several shopkeepers confirmed the resemblance. The man was arrested that very evening. At the station, he stated calmly, I buy, I haul, I resell. That's my trade. I sort by type. Suitcases go to bag dealers, appliances to appliance resellers. Nothing illegal. He repeated the phrase like a refrain, confident in his rightness. Yet the timeline put him at a critical moment. 2 days after the murder, his truck had delivered a lot, including the infamous suitcase. Uncertainty set in. The facts seemed to align too neatly to be innocent. For several days, the investigation centered on him. The newspapers were already speaking of a leaker, bloody traffic in stolen goods. And when the file seemed complete, Morales, one night, reread everything from the beginning. Something resisted. The commissaire was not a man given to hunches, but this time a dull unease kept him awake. Why this couple's photograph in a suitcase? How had it crossed so many hands, markets, cities, and above all, why appear so late, as if it were a calculated message? He spread the documents across his table, the work estimate, the list of laborers, the dates of Don Miguel's departure, the call logs, the approximate hour of the murder. He connected the points, drew lines, turned the lamp. Everything seemed coherent, and yet, coherence, he knew, is sometimes the loveliest of illusions. At daybreak, he decided to start again from zero, even with the obvious. He summoned his deputy, Ramos. Get the car ready. We're redoing the round of junk dealers, one by one. They crisscrossed the region for 3 days. Everywhere, the same tired faces, the same cautious answers. No delivery, no contact, no memory of a certain Torres in the days following the crime. All except one. The first suitcase seller, the one at the San Felipe market, stubbornly stuck to his story. Yes, I bought that lot from Torres. I remember perfectly. That certainty, too firm, pricked the commissaire's curiosity. He slowly closed his notebook and pondered a moment. If Torres sold an entire lot, why has only the suitcase resurfaced? Where did the rest of the items go? This inconsistency, more than any other, lit a spark of suspicion in his mind. Perhaps the second seller was not as uninvolved as he claimed. If he had been mixed up in the theft, or even in the murder, he could have hidden the most compromising pieces and moved only a banal object, a suitcase, to muddy the waters. The commissaire drew a red cross in the margin of his notebook. Then, gently closing the cover, he murmured, Someone is lying. and lying just enough to seem honest. Morales then summoned the man who had first handed the photo to the police. He found him less confident than before. His story, repeated word for word, now showed new hesitations, changing details, confused locations. Why did you buy that suitcase? To travel. Where were you planning to go? To Veracruz? No, Monterrey. Well, I hadn't decided yet. With whom? Alone. The inconsistencies piled up. In a calm voice, Morales requested a search warrant. Search his house. Every room. The search was brief and damning. In a drawer, they found a gold necklace engraved with the initials Rosalia Rodriguez. Under the bed, a scrap of fabric stained with dried blood. And, hidden behind a piece of furniture, a small purse containing papers in the victim's name. Confronted with the evidence, the man collapsed. In a broken voice, he spoke. He described his first break-in, the very night Don Miguel left. He had stolen a few jewels, then fled. But the fear of being recognized, or the lure of gain, had driven him back again. Rosalia was already dead when he caught the smell. Panicking, he concocted a clumsy diversion to make it look like a resale network. He slipped the photo into the suitcase, resold it in haste, convinced the trail would mislead the police. The case seemed closed. Morales wrote in his report, primary suspect arrested, motive, theft, full confession. But he signed that conclusion with a heavy hand. Something remained discordant, like a false note in a perfect melody. In the days that followed, Morales reviewed the file page by page. Yes, the suspect had spoken, but the story did not fully hold. Why keep the jewels instead of fencing them? Why that staging with the suitcase, that almost theatrical gesture, as if someone wanted to gift chance a prearranged trail? Subsequent checks confirmed troubling facts. Modest but regular transfers had been made from Don Miguel's personal account to that of his supposed witness, the very man who had brought in the photo. The dates were significant, one transfer before the renovation, another during it, a final one at the exact time the murder was placed. The call records showed constant exchanges between the two men, always brief but at crucial hours, the eve of the husband's departure, the day after the crime, and again discreetly when the suitcase was discovered. Bent over the call charts, Morales felt the invisible line go taut. It was no longer a commercial coincidence or an old business tie. It was a living, maintained, active connection. The witness, once a mere buyer, was becoming a logical accomplice, the on-site relay to carry out what the other, having left in time, could not do himself. An old file, unearthed from the archives, confirmed the suspicion. The man had worked for Don Miguel years earlier as a warehouse hand. The link was no accident. Doubt gave way to certainty. Behind the facade of the attentive husband and the cooperative witness, Morales now perceived two figures. One, at a distance, who thinks, calculates, orchestrates. The other, on the spot, who acts, executes, and believes that by turning himself in, he will be saved. This time, the trail led back to the source. Reassembling the mechanism, Morales saw the plan's cold design. Act 1, the stage, by ordering the house's refurbishment and multiplying the people on site: workers, neighborhood boys, cleaning women. Don Miguel installed noise, comings and goings, names, enough to dilute responsibility. Act 2, the departure. Leaving the country provided a material and moral alibi. Act 3, the diversion. When the workers' alibis proved solid, another route was needed, a fable of flea markets and chance, a suitcase found miles away, holding a compromising piece of proof. In this final act, the accomplice had a precise role: deposit, sell, steer. What remained was to establish the photograph's material origin. The team searched Don Miguel's American office and archives. In a safe, they found an identical copy. Same paper, same crease, the same trace of humidity on the lower left corner. Material truth opposed itself. The photo belonged to the husband's private collection. It had not landed there by generous chance. Summoned under the pretext of a supplementary verification, Don Miguel returned calm, well-groomed, confident in his construction. On the table, Morales laid out without flourish the bank records, the call logs, the 2 photographs, one found in the suitcase, the other seized from the safe. The dates, the amounts, the flawless concordance formed a continuous line. "These are coincidences, commissaire," he murmured. "Too many," Morales replied. "And coincidences aren't paid for by bank transfers." There followed a long moment in which the husband's voice seemed to search elsewhere for the strength of its lie. Then, in a half voice, he spoke. "I wanted to leave. Everything weighed on me. I thought that by muddling the tracks, I could erase what bound me here." He accused no one else of striking her. He spoke only of his desire, his calculation, his payments, and the way he had planned to misdirect the investigation by multiplying clues. He did not confess the final blow, but his words betrayed the design. He hadn't needed to strike, only to order it. For the true arm of the crime was the witness himself, the man who, weeks earlier, had handed the photograph to the police with feigned indignation. On the night of the departure, everything had been arranged: keys, hours, the items to take to simulate theft. But Rosalia had woken. The tacit instruction, "Let everything be clean," with no witness, no noise, was carried out in a brutal surge. The rest was mere organization. A few items moved, the necklace gone, the suitcase and the photo planted to mislead the police. Confronted by the investigators, the accomplice finally yielded. "Yes, it was he who gave me the money and the instructions. He wanted it to look like a burglary." The prosecutor recorded the facts. The planning of the murder, execution by a third party on the husband's orders, manipulation of evidence to sow confusion. The roles were thus fixed. Don Miguel Rodriguez, intellectual author and instigator; the witness accomplice, material executor, both bound by silence and by the promise of a split that never came to pass. The others, workers, neighborhood boys, cleaning women, were merely extras in the perfect theater of lies. A few weeks later, Morales returned alone to the White House. The seals had been lifted, life had resumed outside, but the house kept its same sadness. The freshly repainted walls seemed draped in a light shroud. He sat on the step, took out his notebook, and wrote slowly. The crime scene was too clean. Perfection here was not innocence, it was the signature of a calculation. One can manipulate the roads, but not the hand that strikes. He closed the notebook, looked one last time at the room where Rosalia had fallen. Outside, voices and laughter returned. The investigation left the present and entered the archives. In the judicial register, charges were filed. Don Miguel, for the machination and obstruction of justice; the man with the suitcase, for aggravated theft and homicide. Morales left the house. On the road, he thought that truth sometimes takes winding paths. One may wish to scheme everything, but a single unforeseeable gesture can break the great machinery. The case was closed, but the lesson remained. There is no perfect crime, only truths too well hidden, until an image, a detail, betrays them. And the door closed behind him, letting silence reclaim the house.